Alright, good evening folks, it's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to another short war video, and today we have very big news coming out of Ukraine, India, and the Middle East. But by far our biggest piece of news of the day is coming out of Iran, as we have seen that an Iranian port has exploded in massive style after it appears to be that a chemical explosion took place at one of their massive ports, and it looks like it could have been a Chinese chemical component used for developing ballistic missiles that ignited and decimated the entire port, and we are hearing massive reports of casualties as a result of that massive explosion. So we have big news on that front, and also we are getting big news out of the Ukraine front that it sounds like the US president is now threatening Putin with direct banking and financial sanctions over his recent civilian attacks in Ukraine, and this appears to be a very big shift, and we have all the news on that front, and also the news from a meeting with Zelensky and the US president. We also have big news out of India and Pakistan that the fighting is still continuing, and we're seeing fighting along the contact line today, and also we have more evidence that India did shut the water off to Pakistan, and we have that on video. But jumping into our first post of the day, this one goes to BNO News. And this is our biggest story of the day. We've seen that massive explosion at the Iranian port this morning, causing at least 5 deaths and over 700 injured. And this is a massive explosion right here, and only the videos can show you just how truly large this really was. So let's take a look at our first video here and show you the extent of this massive explosion. And look at that. That was absolutely insane to see. That was a huge explosion, and the shockwave from it was so bad the cameraman had to drop his phone and jump for cover, and that was a massive explosion indeed. Whatever went off was certainly a very large explosive, and we could see that here in our first video. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to Disclosed TV. And in this post right here, we do have a zoomed out video showing you the extent of the massive smoke plume as a result of that explosion going off, and this is right after that shockwave which we just saw in the first video, and this shows you just how large the smoke plume was, indicating how large the explosion was. So let's take a look at this video as well. And as you can see right there, that was a very, very tall smoke plume right there. I don't know how many stories tall that would be, maybe 20 stories tall, but that is a very large plume of smoke coming right out of their central port in Iran. So very large, and just another angle of it showing you the scale of that huge explosion. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to Medi H. And in this post right here, we do have the closest video of the fire and subsequent massive explosion in the Iranian port today. And this was actually a video taken by one of the port workers. Literally, it looks like a few hundred feet away from the massive fire that was taking place. And one thing I want to note is notice the color of the smoke in the video, because that will be very important in just a moment in determining what was catching fire to cause this massive explosion. So let's take a look at the video and see the view of the dock workers standing right near this explosion. So as we can see right here, this fire is burning orange. That will be very important in just a moment, but as you can see, the fire is starting to get more and more out of control right there. The dock workers are starting to run off, as granted their reactions are very slow, but they're starting to run off right there as they realize the fire is spreading out of control and rapidly getting like an inferno. And there was the massive shockwave and the massive explosion, and those dock workers down there got the brunt of that explosion, obviously, and there was over 700 wounded so far and 5 deceased. So as you can see right there, a lot of them were not taking that seriously until the very last second, and I think they did pay the price for it. And this was a view literally right a couple hundred feet away from the initial blast, so that was crazy to see indeed. But moving on from that post right there, moving on to our next post, this one goes to the Israel radar. And this post right here provides a little bit more context as to exactly what happened after the fact, after the explosion occurred. And like I mentioned, so far there are 5 dead and over 700 wounded. And remember the orange smoke, that's about to be very important right now. And we learned that Chinese ships carrying chemicals needed for Iran's missile industry reportedly docked at this exact port in recent months. And the orange smoke does indicate some sort of rocket chemical or rocket component used in the solid rocket motors. And with that burning right there at the port, and also the Chinese ships docking at that port, that would be a very strong indication that that was probably what exploded and caused that sudden explosion that we saw in the video. So a very strong indication of what that could be, and we get even more confirmation from that in our next post here, which goes to Apex News. And we get more details right here in the post. It says, in recent months, 2 Chinese ships docked at the port in southern Iran, where a massive explosion occurred on Saturday, which was this morning, carrying sodium perchlorate, which is a chemical produced in China and widely reported to be a key component in the solid rocket fuel used by Iran's ballistic missiles. And one thing I want to note is usually when you see a Chinese rocket taking off, you will notice there is a large orange plume of smoke right before it takes off and takes flight going up to its space orbit, and that is also allegedly the chemical that was right here at the port that the Chinese ships were docking and unloading at this port. So I think that is probably the answer right here. That is probably the key to the mystery, is this was a Chinese rocket fuel component being brought in right here at the port. So that is probably what it is, but right now that is just a very strong speculation, but that is what the best we have at the moment. But jumping into our next post here, this one also goes to Apex News. And of course, when Iran is involved, we're always wondering, did Israel cause this? Did Israel do this? And we've gotten a statement from Israel today about that exact question, and we're learning that according to Channel 12, Israeli officials state that Israel is not behind this morning's explosion at the Bandar Abbas port in southern Iran. So Israel is officially saying that they weren't behind it. But of course, when things like this happen, considering that Iran and Israel are basically at war with one another, you always wonder, is something being done in the background to cause it? And it's not really clear, but Israel is denying any involvement in it. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to Iran International English. And with the Iranians being bad at firefighting just like the Russians are bad at it, we're seeing today that the deadly fire that engulfed the port has not been fully contained as of yet, and we do have a video here showing the fire spreading throughout the rest of the port where there are shipping containers and other components on the port side. So let's take a look and see the massive fire spreading. So there you have it, a massive fire spreading very quickly throughout the Iranian port, and there is a helicopter, I believe to be a firefighting helicopter, trying to dump water on top of those fires to put them out. But it looks like to me it's probably going to spread a lot quicker than they're expecting, and it is going to decimate pretty much everything in this port, at least on that side where the fire is currently burning. So very serious fire, and it looks like they're not able to put it out. So just showing you that and the aftermath of the fire. But with that, we are now moving on to our next post here, and this one goes to OSINT Defender. And we can see that on the ground, the result of the explosion of fire has been very devastating to the port, and while you really couldn't see it from the air, there has been absolutely decimation on the ground as a result of that shockwave. And I can show you here, not the entire video sadly, because I don't have the rights to show the video, but here's a picture showing some of the decimation on the ground as a result of that explosion. So it is certainly widespread indeed, and they're continuing to do the firefighting and search and rescue operations, but in my opinion, I don't think it's going to be very fruitful, because if somebody was that close to the explosion where they were caught up in this mess, then I doubt that they probably lived through it. So I'm sure the casualty number will rise, and that is the current situation on the ground. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to War Translated. And we are now going to switch gears away from our Iran port explosion news and onto our Ukraine news, because we do have very big news out of that front as well. And today we are hearing bold, wild, new false claims by Putin that he alleges that the Russian forces have claimed full control over the Kursk region, and he congratulates the cannon fodder troops and the remnants of the North Korean troops for crushing the Ukrainian forces, which of course, that is completely false, and in just a moment Ukraine will refute that claim right there by Putin. But let's take a look at the video and see what Putin said. And Putin says, "I congratulate the entire personnel of all military units participating in the defeat of the Kyiv regime that invaded Russian territory in the Kursk region, and the Kyiv regime's gamble has completely failed, according to Putin, and the enemy has suffered enormous losses, including among the most combat-ready, well-trained, and well-equipped forces of the Ukrainian armed forces, including those armed with Western equipment. These are assault units, special forces, undoubtedly. This will undoubtedly impact the entire line of contact. The complete rout of the enemy in the Kursk region creates conditions for further successful operations by our troops and other critical sectors of the front, bringing closer to the defeat of the Kyiv regime." And once again, more false claims by Putin. There is no evidence that they have completely liberated the Kursk region of the Ukrainian forces, and right now there is still fighting taking place near Kursk, which goes contrary to what Putin is saying right here in the video. So completely false, but to be expected, he lies all the time. But jumping into our next post here, we get an actual refute from the Ukrainian armed forces in this post from War Translated. And we can see right here that Ukraine's general staff refuted Putin's claims of liberating the Kursk region, and quote-unquote defensive operations continue in parts of Kursk, and 5 enemy assaults repelled today, 1 clash is ongoing, and there's no threat of encirclement for Ukrainian units, according to the general staff of Ukraine. So once again, a false statement by Putin, and it is refuted right here by the Ukrainian forces, which is not shocking whatsoever. But jumping into our next post, this one goes to Anton Gerashenko. And in this post right here, we do see that the US president, the French president, also the UK prime minister, and also some more top officials around the world were at the Vatican today, and Zelensky was there too. So they did have a meeting today, and Sadly, I can't show the video of it because, of course, it is copyrighted, but we do have a picture right here showing you there is the U.S. president standing with Zelensky right here in this picture, and they were sitting down in the two chairs on the left to actually discuss the situation between Russia and Ukraine. So they were speaking today. We don't know the exact result of the conversation, but they were speaking, and we have heard some statements from the U.S. president indicating that things are starting to shift between the U.S. and Russia that may not be going in Putin's favor. So we have heard that today, and we have seen this meeting. And also, here's a photo right here showing you all four of the guys together. There's the UK Prime Minister, the French President, the US President, and there's Zelensky, all right here in the Vatican. So there you go. There it is right there on camera. And with that, folks, we're now going to move on to our next news article here, which goes to Null Reports. And we did get a reaction by the US President to today's meeting with Zelensky in the Vatican, and he did post it on his platform called Truth Social. So let's go ahead and take a look at the post. And here is the post from the US President, and skipping past the first part of it because it's pretty much just all politics, and we don't get into that, and it's really pointless right now. Jumping to the very end of the post, the US President said, with all of that being said, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities, and towns over the last few days, and it makes me think that maybe he does not want to stop the war and he's just tapping me along, and it has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions because too many people are dying. And right now, that is the very big card that the US does hold right now, is right now there are not full-scale banking and secondary sanctions being put on Russia, and I've always said that that could be the death knell for the Russian economy and could bring the war to an immediate halt, because if all the sanctions are massively applied to Russia and all the oil is stopped going to Europe from Russia, that could completely cripple the Russian economy and could finish it off all the way. So that could be something coming here very soon, at least according to the statement from the US President, and that is a very good sign to hear that things are changing between the US and Putin. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to the Kyiv Post. Also, another potential good sign is we have heard today that the United States has rejected Russia's demand for the withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions, according to the New York Times, and American negotiators called the demand unreasonable and unfeasible and assured Kyiv that they would not support it. So that was one thing right there, which it sounded like for a moment was going to be included in the U.S. peace deal for Ukraine. It was basically to give up these territories and withdraw their troops, but it sounds like that has changed as of today, and they're calling that unreasonable and unfeasible. So of course, that has always been unreasonable, so I'm glad to see that's being recognized as such by the U.S. officials as of today. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to Global Military Info. And it is now time to switch gears away from our Ukraine news and onto our India and Pakistan news, because right now there are still major escalations happening between those two countries, and it is still very serious. So we're hearing today that for the second consecutive night, the Indian and Pakistani forces exchanged fire along the line of control, and according to the Indian Army, no casualties were sustained. So the fighting is still continuing along the contact line, and this is essentially the very start of the war in a very sort of controlled way. But it's still fighting, and it is still taking place as of right this moment, and that is very concerning to see. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to Open Source Intel. And we have gotten a statement today from Pakistan's defense minister. He was telling Sky News today that the growing tensions over the Kashmir massacre could escalate into a full-scale war with India, not just skirmishes and also fighting along the contact line, but a full-scale war with India. So with him saying that, that's the defense minister of Pakistan, that is pretty much the highest voice it could come from in Pakistan, that these tensions are running out of control and are rapidly heading toward a major war. So not a good sign right there to hear that, and sadly I can't play the video because it is from Sky News and we'd probably get copyrighted, but as you can see, there was the defense minister right there on the picture speaking to the reporters. So not a good sign coming from the defense minister, and pretty ominous to hear that from him. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to Indo-Pacific News. And right now the most contentious issue in this entire conflict between India and Pakistan is the water flow issue, because there were allegations that India cut off the water flow to Pakistan as a result of this brewing conflict. And right here we do have some more evidence that India did indeed stop the flow of water to Pakistan, at least in some rivers, at least for a period of time. And we do see that in other locations, such as the Jhelum River, after stopping the water, India suddenly released excess water without warning, causing flooding in several regions. And also this was all over the news in Pakistan, and the Indian government has not issued an official statement about this, but the evidence does show flooding, and that does indicate that the water was stopped and then rapidly reopened, causing the floodgates to basically cause a flood on the ground. So very serious to see, and once again more proof that India probably did indeed stop the water flow. And just to back that up real quick, we did see a video here showing apparently very little water flow going through one of the rivers, so let's take a look at that. And there you have it. That's one of the rivers going into Pakistan that India allegedly dammed up and stopped the water flow from. And as you can see, there is very little water going through that. It looks almost nearly bone dry, except for just a little small stream right through there. So that is extremely decreased, which indicates that it was cut off. And also we are hearing reports of flooding like I mentioned. So most likely India did cut that off, and that's a hell of a move to make, even in the midst of a war, to cut off the water from civilians. So quite crazy to see. But with that, folks, that is actually our last piece of news for the day. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. And before you go, smack that like button, and also if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel as well for more daily war updates just like this one, and we do appreciate it very much. And also, if you watched the video to this point, go down to the comments below and put LSA, that's 3 letters, LSA in the comments to let us know you watched to this point, and we do appreciate all the kind words very much. Also, if you did notice that I was absent from the stream last night, I was suffering from an extremely bad migraine headache, and I woke up today and was feeling slightly better, but the news was so big I had to get the video out today. So I hope you all appreciate the suffering and everything I do for this channel by suffering through the worst migraine of my life to make this video today. And also, I do appreciate y'all watching very much in all seriousness. But with that, folks, we will see you all tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on our next Nightly War News stream to cover all the rest of the news happening throughout the day. And we do appreciate y'all for watching. So with that, folks, we'll see you all on the next one. And also, I almost forgot to mention this. If you want to support the channel financially, you can do so on our Patreon page. The link is in the description below for Patreon, where you can go over there and sign up for a monthly membership and support the channel that way, which is a very big help and helps to keep the channel running. But with that, folks, we'll see you all at 10 p.m. tonight on the War News stream. And with that, bye-bye for now.